But it's a subject very close to my heart when my server died and both of the disks in a RAID 10 went the wrong too. And I kept thinking, oh, if only I'd had a system where there was a master slave. And it was really important because although we had backups, we had a lot of streaming data. And as the hours ticked by, it became more and more out of sync. So to have something like a master slave setup that you can change quickly would be amazing. And then René does a talk which was describing exactly my problem and the solution. So I thought that would be brilliant to have him on here, just so I can ignore it and have exactly the same issue happen again in the future. So René, without further ado, welcome to Joomla London. I vaguely remember you about 5 months ago, 6 months ago.
We had some terrible family issues with people passing, so it's quite some rocky months. But these last few months, I've got a little bit spare time to visit meetings like this. And we met last Saturday, or last Friday, so to speak, and we talked about my session, and we came up with the idea to do this again for Joomla London. So thank you again for asking me. And if it's all right, I'm going to share my screen. I'll first have a couple of slides, doing a bit of an intro, trying to explain what master slave setup is, and then do a real-time demo with that I've got 3 servers running, installing Joomla, creating a database, transferring it to a master. Anyway, I'll show you, right?
Yeah, brilliant. Go for it.
Okay. Like this, yes. All right. So first, setting up a master slave debug replica. Is this visible for everyone?
Yep, everything's visible.
I guess so.
Yep. I'm waiting for it. It's still showing multiple screens. It's not yours yet. Oh, there you go. Yep, that's it.
Yeah, we're good.
All right. Okay. Good. I work for Destiny. Destiny is a European company which does business communications. I'm a senior web developer with the team solution development. Business communication is the primary business is a telephony business where we have fixed lines, mobiles, integrations, that sort of things. I mean, the core business is telephony, but we are in 7 or 8 countries in Europe. We've got 2.2 million phone users. We have 750 people on staff, of which there are 200 developers. So that's quite an interesting team to talk to. We have 4 offices in the Netherlands, and in a small town called St. Oedenrode in the south of the Netherlands, we have a department called Solution Development, where I work with 9 other colleagues. And we have a service called Publicanda, and Publicanda is a Joomla website with support, hosting, security, a page builder. We use Utheme as a service. We were running about 90 Joomla 3 and 4 websites, and all new websites we're building. We've got about 15 running now. We all build them with Utheme for our clients and for internal clients. We build a lot of solutions for internal development as well. I think at the moment, 40% of my time goes to external clients, 60% of my time goes to internal clients. So, server setups. The most used option nowadays you see for smaller website is a server which holds a web server process, mainly Apache, I think, for Joomla, but could be Nginx as well, or Open Lightspeed, and a database server, being MariaDB or MySQL. That's most used. What are the advantages? It's the costs. You only need 1 server in which you can run multiple websites with multiple databases. And what are the disadvantages? If there's a disruption with this, either the server or Apache or with MariaDB or MySQL, your website goes down. And also, if it's all running on one server, you can get performance issue. Is Apache, when Apache is really busy or the database is really busy, it slows down everything on that server. So a variant you see is that you have a server where the web server process is running and another server where the database is running. So these are two separate servers. The advantage is, of course, the performance. You've got two processors, you've got twice the memory, you've got twice the disk space, so you simply have more performance. When you have a disruption, either with one of the servers or if Apache or MariaDB goes down, still your website goes offline, goes down. You can create a redundant database setup in which you have one web server and two database servers, and the first database server you will set up as a master, second database server could be a slave, and if one of these two database servers goes down, the other one can take over. They are automatically in sync, so you can switch over to one of the other, another database server. The advantage is your database is redundant. Still, if your web server or Apache has a problem, your website is still down. Well, the most luxurious setup, if you have full redundancy, which means you have multiple web servers and multiple database servers, and well, then you have everything. It's fully redundant. You have scalable performance if you combine it with a load balancer. And the disadvantages, of course, is these are costly solutions. If you use a load balancer, you get a setup like this. You have multiple web clients going through the internet, and they arrive at your website, but technically they first arrive at a load balancer. And a load balancer distributes all incoming traffic across all connected web servers. And database handling is distributed across multiple database servers. And what the load balancer also does is, once these web services are too busy, it can automatically spin up a new or an extra web server. Same goes with the database. If the database becomes too busy, the load balancer can automatically start up an extra database server. So your load is automatically reduced then, because it's divided over more servers. Amazon is a company that does this very, very well. There are other companies as well, but we are currently at the process of moving our most important client portal to a Amazon-based load balancing setup. It's quite a technical challenge because it's pretty complex for me, at least it is. But then you have the most reliable and redundant setup. You can get, as a smaller user, you can get redundance by with a quick effect using a master-slave setup, and that's exactly what I want to show you this evening. But how does the master-slave setup work? There is a master database server which has binary logging, and there is a slave database server that duplicates this binary log, and the binary log is then processed in the slave database. And MariaDB and MySQL and also other database providers have options to create master-slave setups for replication using this binary logging system. So what is a binary log? In the binary log, all database changes are logged. And these are both database data changes and also structured changes. So data changes is something like records being added or being changed or being deleted, like a new user being created, a new article being created, but also structured changes. And structured changes are new tables that are created or tables that are changed. For example, if you install an extension in Joomla that most of the time comes with its own database tables, then that's a structured change. And the binary log consists of these log files and an accompanying index file. So I'm going to show you how you could do a master-slave setup. And to do that, I'm running a Parallels desktop. And I've got 3 Ubuntu 22.04 Linux servers running. One of them is a web server, and 2 of them are database servers. They all have 4 GB internal memory per server, 10 GB of disk space. I'm going to install a Joomla 431 website on the web server and create a Joomla DB database on the database server. I'm running Parallels Desktop because I'm working with a Mac, and Parallels Desktop is a virtualization software where you can install Windows, but for example also Linux servers on your MacBook. As I said, it's only available for Mac, but there are quite some alternatives if you're using Windows. You could also use UTM. UTM is also just available for Mac. It's not for Windows. UTM is based on QEMU, which is available for Windows. I'll show you. But another very common virtualization software is VirtualBox, which is available for Linux, for Windows, and for Macs. And there's also QEMU. That's a generic open source machine emulator and virtualizer. And it's also available for Windows and Mac and Linux machines. As I said, I'm running Parallels Desktop. So what are we going to do? I'm going to create a database and a virtual host on the web server, a database on the database server. I'm going to install Joomla, download and install Joomla. I'm going to make the database server the master server. I'm going to stop the web server to create a database dump, create a slave server and import that database dump. I'll explain you why I need to do that. Configure replication and activate it. Restart the web server, and then we've got replication running, and then simulate a crash of the master server. And later on, I will provide the scripts that I use to set this all up. The web server is running at the address above, 10.2.11.55.9. The DB server is at 55.10, and the DB2 server, second database server, is running at 55.11. The Joomla database will be Joomla_DB. The database user will be Joomla_DB user, and the database password will be Joomla_pass. All just plain and simple usernames and passwords, just for the purpose of this demonstration. So I've started up my terminal. I'm logged in on the web server. The IP address there is, as I said, 10.2.11.55.9. I'm logged in the DB1 server with the IP address 55.10. And here I'm logged in on the second database server, which has 10.2.11.55.11. I'm going to be typing a lot of command line commands. Is my screen, is it large enough for everyone to read, to see what I'm doing? Or do I need to increase the font size?
It looks fine for me.
I think it's okay from my end.
Yeah, I think the interruption we had actually was someone who'd left their mic open and didn't realize they were talking about something else. That's why it didn't make sense.
Okay.
As far as I could see, it was Nikita Dolphin.
Yeah, that's okay. I've muted him. But yeah, no, it looks fine. It looks fine, really.
Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty database on the DB1 server. So I'm going to be copy pasting commands. You won't see that, but that makes it quite much easier for me to replicate all this. First, I'm going to become root by typing sudo sumin, and then I'm going to change the configuration of MariaDB. Because by default, MariaDB listens to this bind address, which is 127.0.0.1. If that is set up, MariaDB only listens to incoming traffic from the server itself. So because I've chosen a setup where I have a separate web server and a separate database server, we need to allow the database server to listen to incoming traffic on its general IP address. So I'm going to change that here. I'm simply going to change this to the IP address of the server itself. And then store that. And then restart the database server. All right. Then I'm going to log back in. And I'm going to create a database. So I'm going to say create database Joomla DB. I'm going to create a user for this database. Create user Joomla DB user at localhost, identified by, and this is then the password that we'll use. So now I've created the user. And then I'm going to set the access rights for this user. And that's like this. I'm going to grant all privileges on Joomla DB.star, which means all tables in the database, to the Joomla DB user coming from any address identified by the password. Then, once you've done that, you need to flush the privileges so that the rights are written to disk, and then you can exit the database server. So now we've created a database and we've created a user for it. Then I need to change the firewall, because if I check the firewall of the database server right now, UFW status, then you see the firewall is only allowing SSH traffic. That means that I can log in with my terminal. So what we need to do is we need to allow the web server to talk to the database server. And that's this command. We're going to allow incoming traffic from the web server, which has this IP address, to port 3306. And port 3306 is the default port that my MariaDB or MySQL is listening on. So if we now check the firewall status, we can see that traffic to port 3306 is allowed from this IP address. Then we can check if the web server is allowed to connect to the database server. So I'm going over to the web server and try to connect to the database running at host 55.10, which is DB1, with the username, Joomla DB user, and the password. Well, we're in MySQL. Let's use the database, use Joomla DB, and see if we can question something like show grants. And then we can see there is usage. Let me put this a bit larger, right? We can see these are the grants on the Joomla database. So we can connect from the web server to the database server. That's all what we needed to know. If I'm going too quick, or if you have any questions, please ask, right? Then I'm going to install Joomla on the web server. So I'm going to become root on the web server. And I'm going to create a folder for that by going to var www.html. I'm going to download Joomla with this command. And what this does, it loads Joomla from Joomla 431 from the original download site and stores that as the file joomla.zip. It's now downloading. Here it is. ls-l joomla.zip. And there it is. I've just downloaded it. Then I'm going to install the files. And I do that with this combined command. Well, I gotta copy it the right way. I'm going to create a directory Joomla. I'm going to go into the directory, unzip the zip file that I've just downloaded, and remove the zip file. There it is. So when I'm now in the folder var www.html Joomla. Let's see what files we have. And here are the files of the Joomla installation. Then I have to set the file rights, because the user www data has to be the owner of all these files. I do that with the chown command, changed owner. -r means also in subdirectories, and I'm going to make www data the user and www data the group. So if I then check the owner, you see every file and every folder now has the correct username. I'm also going to rename the htaccess file with the move command. I'm going to move htaccess.txt to .htaccess. So the files are now ready. Then I'm going to create a virtual host on the web server. To do that, I'm going to create a file in the Apache folder, in the folder sites available, called joomla.conf. I'm going to paste in some configuration information for the virtual host. It's this information, and it says the server admin is admin@joomla.dev.test. What's the document root? Where are the files on the website? That's the folder we've just created. What's the server name? Joomla.dev.test. These are settings for Apache, and what's the error log and what's the custom log. So I'm going to save this file. That's now saved. And then I'm going to enable this website with the a2n website, Apache to enable site command, enabling site Joomla. And to activate, we need to restart Apache. But first, I'm going to also enable the mod rewrite module in Apache. And mod rewrite makes the use of search engine friendly URLs possible. So now the last thing we need to do is we can restart Apache. And that's with this command. So Apache is now configured. Joomla is, the files are installed. Apache is restarted. And the last thing I need to do is to tell to my Mac in the local hosts file that I need to set the IP address where the website is running. So I'm going to create a new session and edit my local hosts file, sudo nano/nano / etc. hosts, and then add the settings for the Joomla website. You see, I've set the same IP address here as where the web1 server is running. So this will be the domain name, joomla.dev.test. I've added that to my local host file. See if I can ping it. Ping Joomla. Joomla.dev.test. And we've got a reply. So now we can go to Chrome and open up the website. And then, if all is well, the install should be running. There it is. Okay. Let's install Joomla. So the website name is Joomla Test. Super user will be super admin. The username will be super admin. Password super admin 2023. Email address of the super admin user. Then we can set the database connection. Well, by default, Joomla assumes that the database is running on localhost, which is the setup where the database server and the web server are on the same machine. In my case, the database server is running on a different IP address, which is 10.2.11.55.10. Okay. What's the database username? That's Joomla DB user. What's the database password? That's Joomla_pass. The database is already set, Joomla_DB, and I'm going to use test_ as the table prefix. Install Joomla. Well, because the web server is running on a different server, Joomla gives us a security warning. To confirm that you are the owner of this website, please delete the file name Joomla blah 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 text that has been created in the installation folder. So I need to remove that file to continue. So let's go to the web server then. See the installation, do a list, and here we see that this file was created. So I'm going to remove this file, copy, rm, and then the file. Now it's deleted. It's now gone. And see if we can continue. Install Joomla. That works. Okay. Joomla is installed. Open administrator. And then we can log in. Yes. Username superadmin. Password superadmin 2023. And then login. And we're now logged in to Joomla. I'm going to change some small things in the configuration. So I'm going to go to System Global Configuration. I'm going to set use URL rewriting to yes. And the system says then Apache Lightspeed rename htaccess.txt to .htaccess. but I already did that when I installed the files. And I'm going to set in the System tab the session lifetime to 60 minutes. Save and close. And I'm going to install the sample data. Install, okay. That's then being downloaded. There we go. And then let's check the front end of the website. And we've got the website running. Blog, that works. Sample layouts, category list, your modules, everything seems to be working fine. Okay, so far so good. So we've got Joomla installed, we've got a database created, and we've got Joomla running. Then I'm going to configure the database 1 server to allow access from database 2 server. So I'm going to go to the command line, go to db1. And if we remember, here are the firewall settings. We only allowed traffic on port 3306 from the web server. So what I'm going to do now is do the same thing for the second database server. So UFW allow in from 10 to 11:55:11, which is DB2. Check the status again. And now there's incoming traffic allowed also from the second database server. And why do I need to do that? The second database server needs to be able to transfer this binary logging data from the first database server to the second server to be able to process it so that the database can be replicated. Now I'm going to change the configuration of the first database server to allow replication. Inside these settings, this is the primary part. For replication, every database server needs to have a unique server ID. And by default, the first database server is set to 1. So I'm going to paste in some configuration information like this. And then we can remove this. So what does this say? It says here the server ID is 1, meaning this is the first server in the master-slave setup. I'm going to set binary logging on because by default, binary logging is not enabled. And we need this binary log, which holds all information of the database changes, to be transferred to the second server. The file name for the binary logging, I'm going to set that to Joomla DB. That's for me so that I can recognize what are the binary log files of this database server. And what I'm also going to set is binlog do DB, which means for what database do you want the server to keep the binary logs? And I'm going to set that it does this only for the Joomla database. I'm going to save that and then restart the database server like this. And now let's check if we see binary log files. So we go to var lib mysql and do an ls-l. And now we see these two files. These two files are the binary log files for the Joomla database. So these files will automatically be just transferred with the replication process to the second server. All right. I'm going to log into the database. And for replication to work, we need to create a replication user. So I'm going to create a user called db slave user, coming from all different servers and identified with this password, db slave pass. So that user is now created. And I'm going to give access rights to this server. And what rights am I going to give it? I'm going to give it replication slave rights. That means that this user, db slave user, is allowed to replicate the binlog information to the slave. And I'm going to give these rights on all databases for that user. That's now created. And just as in the previous case, when I change the rights, I need to flush the privileges to write them to disk. And I need to Oh, that's all I need to do. Okay. Next step is temporarily stop Apache web server and create a database dump. Why do we need to do that? In order for the slave to replicate the information from the master server, initially the slave database server needs to have an exact copy of the database. But if we would keep the Apache web server running whilst we set up our slave server, there could be database changes because user could be logging in, articles could be created. So I'm going to temporarily stop the Apache server from working. So I'm going to go to the web server and give the command system control stop Apache. Apache is now stopped. So if I do something with the database, for example, go to content and show articles, that won't work because the web server has now stopped. So the web server isn't working anymore. I've temporarily stopped the web server, so we don't have any transaction going to the database. So what I'm going to do then is create a database dump on the web server with the command mysql dump. Let's see, where is it? Search file or directory. What did I do wrong? MySQL dump user Joomla pass host is.
Go one directory up. You shouldn't have the installation directory anymore.
Ah, yes, that's it. I'm going to go to the root directory and retype the command. Thanks, Dimitris. I was in the wrong directory. I was in a directory that no longer exists, and therefore the MySQL dump process couldn't create a database dump. So let's see if we got a database dump now. There it is, Joomla db.sql. I'm going to copy this database dump to the database 2 server with the command scp, which is secure copy. So I'm going to copy Joomla db.sql to the user René on the second database server in my home directory. Are you sure you want to continue connecting? Yes. My password. And the file is copied over to the second database server. Then I'm going to go to db1 and I'm going to check the master status because the database 1 server is now the master database server, and I'm going to check the master status. And what this says is, okay, what's the current binary log file that you are writing data to? That's Joomla db bin 001. And what's the position in that file? What's the index where you are currently writing to in that file? The position is 658, and that's a really important number because we need to set that number later on the slave server, so that the slave server knows from what starting point it needs to start replicating. So I'm going to go to db server 2, become root there. And first I'm going to configure the firewall to allow incoming traffic from the web server. So I'm going to allow traffic from the web server, which was at 55.9, to port 3306 UFW status. And it's now allowing incoming traffic. Why do I do this? If the DB1 server would fail, I would set the web server to read and write data from the database running on the second server. But then I need to allow incoming traffic at port 3306, which is the MySQL port, from that web server. So I need to set the firewall there open as well. Then I'm going to log into MySQL and create an empty database. Create database Joomla DB. Create a user for it. And I'm going to give that user the same username and password as on the first database server. That's handy because these database login credentials are set in the configuration of PHP of Joomla. So for convenient use, I'm going to set the same username and password. I'm going to set the access rights. I'm going to grant all privileges on the Joomla database, on all tables, to the Joomla DB user, identified with this password. I've done changes. to privileges. So I'm going to flush the privileges to disk. And then exit from MySQL. Then I'm going to import the database dump. Let's see if we have the database dump here. ls-l/home/René. There's my database jump that I just copied over. So I'm going to import that into the database. So that's MySQL, user is root, host is localhost, into Joomla DB, what file, home René joomladb.sql. That's now imported. And then I'm going to modify the configuration of the second database server to configure it as a slave server. Well, first we need to set the binding address as well here, because this is only by default. This server is also only listening to the localhost port. So I'm going to change that to the IP address of the server itself, like this. And then I'm going to change the replication setup. Well, this also has a default setup, and by default it says server ID is 1. What I said before is that each server in the master slave setup needs to have a unique ID. So I'm going to copy over the configuration settings. I'm going to set this server to server ID is number 2. So this is the second server in the master slave setup. I'm going to turn on binary logging. The log base name is also set to JoomlaDB. And here I can specify what databases this server needs to replicate. And by typing the command replicate do DB, I'm setting that this server only needs to replicate the JoomlaDB database. But technically, you could set it up that the slave server replicates all databases which are on the master. Well, in this setup, I'm only going to replicate the JoomlaDB database. Save the information. Restart MariaDB. Log back in. Now I need to configure MariaDB to start talking to the master database server. How do we do that? With this command, change master to master host is. What is the master host? This is the IP address of the master host. What is the master user? That's this DB slave user that we've created before on the first server. What's the password? DB slave pass. Sorry. What is the master log file that you need to start using? Well, we still had that here open. The master log file was JoomlaDB bin 00001. And what's the log position? Well, by default it says 660, but the actual position is 658. So I'm going to set that here as well. 658. All right. And then I'm going to start the slave process. Start slave. And then I can ask the slave status with the command show slave status. And then there are two things very important. The first one is slave IO running. Slave IO running is yes. That means the slave server can read and read data from the master server. And also, is the slave SQL server running? That's also yes. And what database are we replicating? JoomlaDB. So these two values, they need to be yes in order for replication to work. So now we have the master database running the Joomla database and a slave database running the exact database. The slave has read all relay log, waiting for more updates. So the slave is waiting for updates that are being created in the master database server. So we can now restart the web server. So the web server continues working. So I'm going over to the web server and restart Apache. That's now running again. Refresh. And if all goes well, we've got the articles list. I'm going to go back to the dashboard. I'm going to go to users. And in the database, we see the super admin user, which was registered today at 1838. And the last visit was 1838. That's UTC times. Well, let's check if these databases are in sync. And we can do that by going to the first database server. We're still logged into MariaDB, so we're going to say show databases. What database do you have? We have the Joomla DB here. I'm going to use that. Use Joomla _DB. And then I'm going to say show tables. What tables do we have in the database? These are all the tables. And I'm interested in the users table. So I'm going to run a query. I'm going to select the ID, the name, the username, the email, and the last visit date from test users. And there we see user ID 159, name superadmin, username superadmin. This is the email, and that's the last visit date. Let's check that in Joomla. User 159, that's this user. So that's a match. Let's see if we get the same results on the slave database. So I'm going to go to the slave database server. Check databases there as well. There we also have Joomla DB. Use that database, Joomla _DB. Show tables. We have the same list of tables. We have the same test users table and run the same query. Select ID, name, username, email, last visit from test users. And we have the same information. That's logic because we did a database dump on the web server, imported that into the slave database. So these databases, they seem identical. Well, let's create a new user in Joomla. So I'm going to type new, click new, name Jerk London, username Jerk London, email address user at jerklondon.co.uk. Use that same information as the password. And this is a regular user, so I'm going to just only add it to the registered users group, save and close. User is now created. Let's check it on the first database. I'm going to repeat the select command. And now we also see user Jerk London, user at jerklondon.co.uk, last visit date null. That user has never logged in. Let's check it on the slave database. There we have the same information. ID 160, Jerk London, never logged in. Let's have this user log in. Copy the email address, go to the front end of the website, and log in. London, password, login. User is then logged in. Let's refresh this screen. Did I refresh it? Now it's refreshing. Last visit has updated. Let's check it in the database. First, the master database. We now have a last visit date. Slave database, refreshed. We now have a last visit date. So you see now that these two database servers, the slave database automatically replicates all information that's coming in from the master server. So every database change, whether it's installing, whether you create tables or modify tables, all these changes are automatically replicated to the slave. We can check this information as well in the master slave status. So if I go here to show master status, we now see Joomla bin DB position 99166. Let's check that here as well. Oh, I lost the session to the second database. SH René at db2 to as min MySQL user root show what's the command show slave status. And here you see the same master log position 99166, which was also here. So they are exactly in sync. Well, what if the master database would have a failure? I can simulate that simply by just simply bringing down the first database server. So if I do shutdown -halt now, go down now, connection closed, connection lost, and if I check the status here, we see that DB1 is now offline. And if I check Joomla by going to the dashboard or by going to, for example, the logout page, it's not working anymore. The web server cannot connect again to the database server because the database server is down, and eventually we will get an error of 500, meaning that the web server has lost connection to the database. It's trying to refresh. Sorry, there was a problem we could not recover from. It cannot connect to the database. But we have an online we have a copy running at the slave server. So how can we continue our website by changing the Joomla configuration? So if I go to the web server or www.html Joomla, I'm going to edit the configuration.php. In the Joomla config, there's the IP address of the web server, and the address 55.10 was DB1. So if I change that to 11, which is the second database server, DB2, and save the data, that's now saved. Let's go to the website, try to refresh. Yeah, we're up again. And also the front end, it's available again. The site is working again. And I can even create another user or create an article, for example. No, let's create a user. So plus new René test password René test 1 2 3 4 5 6 René test 1 2 3 4 5 6 email. Save and close. I've now created a new user, René test, user ID 161. Let's check the second database, DB2. Show databases. Use Joomla _DB. Show tables. So, and then run the query again to get the users from the database. And now we have user 161 René test, which is perfectly written to the second database, to the slave database. Well, what would be the situation if the first database server would become back online? Then we need to manually reverse the situation. That means we would have to stop the web server, create a database dump on the slave server, re-import that into the master server, select the master status, update the slave server, so that it's all in sync again. But when we have an emergency with DB server 1, because of the fact that we have an online copy, an in-sync replication copy, we can continue through the second server. So that's actually it. It's quite technical, but I've got the scripts with documentation. I've got that here. These are the steps that I took. I will provide that to Philip so he can distribute it to everyone that's been on the session to see how I set this up, and you can try it yourself. Any questions?
Yeah, I had a question just related to locked tables or locked content and how that gets handled by the replicated database.
Well,
I'd imagine it doesn't really affect it very much.
No, because content is locked, so it can't be overwritten. And the only thing that the slave server does is it just copies the data over. That's it.
Yeah.
It copies the data from the master server to the slave server. That's what the replication
changes that actually get written.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in terms of changing the IP address over, it could easily be automated, I would imagine, with Ansible or something like that.
Yeah, with Ansible, or with there's also a keep alive daemon that you can configure to automatically switch the IP address over. That's true. I did some Googling to see if there is a script that handles this automatically, and I found a few scripts, which was a really simple script that just simply checked if the master database is online, and then if not, it could change the IP address in the configuration. But there was a comment with what I found that said you could better use a keep alive team, because that's better equipped to constant monitor the availability of the master database. So that's also an option.
Really nice. We have a question from Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was the case that the master fails and the slave takes over. And now you are running with the slave, the master gets repaired and comes back. How do you then change the roles back? Because that's the interesting part.
Yeah. Well, the slave is actually ahead of the master, right? Because there are changes written to the slave which are not to the master. What you would need to do is freeze or stop the web server, create a database dump of the slave, re-import that into the master, check the master status to see what the position is in the bin log file, and then update the slave with that information, and then they're back in sync again. But there needs to be a moment, Richard, that you need to get the data which is on the slave back into the master. Another thing what you could do is to stop the slave process on the slave server, yeah, and then configure it the other way around, so that the slave becomes the master and then the master becomes the slave.
Yeah, that's the other way around, but yeah. Then you would also need a firewall rule and also the permissions in the other direction.
Of course, yeah. So
so both is possible.
Yeah, both is possible. Yeah, but you need, that's a correct remark. You need to configure the slave server as a master and allow the original master to read from the slave. But that's just a one line firewall change. But that's something you need to take into account. And that's why
I know it very well from I've done this a long time in my real life job with Oracle databases, and meanwhile in my new company where I work we have PostgreSQL, so that's all very similar. If you deal with redundant domain controllers for Windows domains, that's a bit more tricky. So my hope was it's as easy as with the other databases, and that's the case.
I'm no expert on Windows, but I did some tweaking around with these domain controls, but that's not fun to go. in a Linux setup where I'm more comfortable, it's I think for me it's a bit easier. But the most luxurious solution, of course, is using a load balancer. But that's also way more pricey. I mean, This is just a simple setup, and you can hire a VPS to do this for 5 to 10 euros a month, and that could be a small company a redundancy solution. We're actually using that now in our company. We have a portal running, which is called our My Destiny portal. That has to be online 24/7. We're now using this master-slave setup, but we are currently also in the process of moving everything to Amazon with a load balancer setup.
Are you using Smart Search in Joomla very much? Because in the upcoming release 4.3.0, which will be up in the next weeks, I think, end of the month, there will be a bug fix. We have in the Smart Search, we have a table which uses the memory engine. And there was a problem, a bug report for a replication scenario where that was not a master-slave scenario, but a load balancing scenario, where exactly this failed because that does not support memory tables. And we have made a bug fix for that, so that in this case, the finder tries not to set the engine to that memory table and continues with a normal InnoDB. So if you run into this error, the fix will be there in a few weeks with the next release.
For our company, for our client portal, we're not using that. What I forgot to mention, if another interesting setup you could use with the master-slave setup is that you could tweak an application in a way that it only writes to the master, but all reads are being done from the slave. That could be interesting in a performance view, so that the reads are done from a different server than the writes. Of course, Joomla is not equipped for that because you would have to rewrite, I think, practically all model code to do the writes only to the master and do the reads to the slave. And you also would have to configure somewhere within Joomla that there is a slave server or there's a read-only server that you read from.
You've got
could be
database
something that could
session stuff saved to the database. That would work.
Yeah.
Change that. I find it a little bit disappointing that with this master-slave setup, that there isn't kind of a functionality built in for it to recover once the master database comes back online. That it just reads changes from the slave database and catches itself up. A bit like a DNS server where it's constantly master and slave are constantly kind of keeping each other updated.
Yeah, well, all the online documentation I found, Gary, was just how to set up a master slave and what to do in case of an emergency. I actually nowhere found decent scripts to automatically fail over to a slave and later to recover once the master is back up again.
That's weird.
I know technically how to do it, but I haven't had the time to work out a scenario and write scripts for it. So,
what I'm just thinking is that for the failover situation, when the master fails, you have to reconfigure Joomla to connect to the slave at the moment. And I think it would be an easy change to say Joomla gets not a database server, but optionally a list of servers. And you use on all these servers the same username and the same password and so on. So the only change for the setup, for the installation and for the global configuration would be that we have a comma-separated list of servers in the server field, and then Joomla could always try to connect to the first one. And if this connection fails, it connects for a certain time to the second one. So a kind of an easy solution that at least the first failover situation is handled smoothly, because then you know you have a problem and are prepared. But when the failover happens and you don't notice it and people visit the site, then the site is down.
I personally run to do uptime monitoring. I run a server using Uptime Kuma, and Uptime Kuma is an open source alternative for tools like Uptime Robots. And Uptime Kuma can also check the availability of database. So you just put the database credentials in Uptime Kuma, and Uptime Kuma can check for you if the database is online. So that's also an interesting tool.
What's interesting about that is it can also hook straight into something like Home Assistant, which is like an automation engine. So you could get that to do all kinds of fancy things.
Yeah.
We did have another question from Dimitri.
Yes.
Yes. First of all, thank you. Very nice and very explanatory, all you did. My question is, this is a lot of plumbing about servers. Isn't it easier to just offload the whole thing to something like AWS Aurora?
Probably. I don't know. I have no experience with that, so I can't really tell you. I think so, but I'm not. I'm not equipped enough to give you a good answer on this, Dimitris.
Could you expand a little bit more, Dimitri?
Sorry?
What was the technology? Aurora?
Yes, it's called Amazon Database Aurora. Let me just...
Okay.
Yeah, it's database as a service, basically. So you pay for connection, reads and writes and stuff like that. But yeah, for depending on what you're looking for, maybe this might be a better solution for Joomla. I mean, it's better in the sense that you don't have to do a lot of the server plumbing.
I know.
You just put the IP address, the database user database password, and then you have 99.999% uptime or whatever they call it.
Yeah. I know we're currently in the process of moving everything to Amazon, and we're going to start up a pool of web servers, but also a database thing. I forgot the name, but then you can just by ticking a box, you can say I want this redundant, and then that's it, and it's all handled automatically for you by Amazon. That's true.
Yes, that's the good part, because this is like tedious work. You have to work a lot with the command line within different servers. It's getting, especially the part that you have to get a copy of the database, and in case of some failure and stuff like that, and then do everything manually. Yeah, it's tedious, but it's a great way to have a master slave.
Yeah. And the subject is not related to Joomla. This could be a Laravel application. This could be a WordPress website, whatever. Any website that uses a MySQL database can be set up with replication with this simple setup. It took me quite a few days to figure out how it's actually working, but once you figured it out, how to set up these server IDs and everything, then it's actually not that difficult.
I think at the end it's a matter of cost. For the normal website of a singing club or something, you won't need something like that at all. But of course, if you make a government site where you need high availability, then you have to think about such solutions, and you have to calculate the cost. Is it cheaper to do the hosting for the different virtual hosts, or is it cheaper to take something in the cloud? Like I think it's Amazon Web Services. Can it be AWS or AVD or something? That there are many such solutions, and then you have to calculate what is cheaper.
I know. I saw a question in the chat. Who here has had database issues with their hosting? Well, we had. We are running our own service, and we had an issue that the main database of our client portal just crashed. We didn't find the cause, but it crashed. I was already in a situation that I made database dumps every 3 hours continuously. So in the end, we lost 3 hours of data because we could re-import a 3-hour-old database dump. But this was such an uncomfortable situation for us and for our clients that we then decided, okay, we go to master slave setup as a quick solution. and then later on we will move everything to a load balanced situation. But we had a full crash of our database, and we had indexes corrupt. We couldn't recover them again with the recovery or optimization of the database. We had a serious problem,
and of course I did as well a couple of months ago, which is why I was so interested in this talk. Where I had a RAID 10, two disks went at the same time, the wrong two, and the problem was there was streaming data as well. And the other thing, when you get into a disaster like that, it says you can swap disks in and out and save the data and all that. The reality is it's offline for quite a while. So they took hours at the server company to work out whether or not they could recover it. Because all that time it's down. So to be able to switch from a master to a slave while they decide whether or not it could be recovered would be ideal and actually negate the issue. So I've had to do other things as well, and this is a lovely solution. And Dimitri's got an interesting point with the other service, but a lot of people are on this sort of setup. So what you've described is something where you could then get a second server and change the configuration and do it. Whereas what Dimitri is explaining would be, you're changing your provider.
Yeah.
I mean, there are also different solutions on the market. I deal with that in my real-time job where we are making control systems for critical infrastructure. And so we have redundant databases for such stuff. But what we also have is that you completely have cloned virtual machines and have the redundancy on the virtualization level. Solutions like Everrun or Double Take, or things provided by VMware, but those are really expensive. So it's a matter of cost with which solution you choose. But those solutions are the easiest one, and I think that's also what they do in the cloud. They have that on virtual machines, and they have a complete clone of that virtual machine and have the redundancy on that level.
I assume if you had something, something like Aurora.
Joomla London user group saying corruption would be the worst. You don't have to bribe us to ask questions. You can ask questions for free here. When a pint helps, but there's no money needs to change hands.
I'll take a pint, thanks. I'm just wondering about the Aurora thing. If you had your files on your hosting server and then you connected your Joomla site to an Aurora database, what would the latency? What kind of latency would you expect on that kind of connection?
I mean, if you're in the same network, like AWS, like your server is
Let's say your host was outside of AWS.
No, you shouldn't do that.
You would only do it if you were in AWS.
Yeah, the idea is because somebody already posted another solution from Azure. There's another one from DigitalOcean. There's another one from Linode and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you get your website on those servers, so you have the same network, very low latency speed between communication between servers, and then it's easy.
Yeah.
So the idea to have something, let's say, to I don't know, SiteGround or whatever, and then connect to an Amazon or an Azure or something else database, doesn't sound very
clever.
Yeah.
René?
Yeah.
When the main server is down, then the slave becomes master.
Sort of, yeah.
Imagine that it's not clear what the cause is that the master went down.
Yeah.
Is it possible then to create another slave?
Yeah.
As a backup for the now become master slave? And how long would that take?
Well, not much time, but you do need, the idea is, you do need to import the database dump from the slave server into your second slave server. So that well, you see on my setup, it's just a MySQL dump command, copy it over and import it. If you know how to do it, if you have the commands figured out already, I think depending on the size of your database, it's a 5 to 10 minute job, I guess, not longer.
So in the case of a big emergency, there's no need to have a big panic that you have only one server running. You could be setting up a second slave just in case.
Yeah, but if you only have one database server running and that database, for whatever reason, gets corrupt, then then you don't have then it's not possible anymore to create a database system to import that into your new to set up slave. Björn asked, can the two databases sync? Not sure what you mean, but what you can do is you can create a master with, for example, 3 slaves, where 3 slaves all are in sync with the master. You can have a master which has a slave, and that slave has its own slave. So you have a master slave setup. That's also possible.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Great. I think we've really exhausted the different combinations that we can have there. Belt and braces and a little bit more. Spare belt. But that's brilliant. Thank you so much.